Hi guys, it's Mr. Westner. I'm excited to be back with you to learn more about Pennsylvania history. And today we're going way back, okay? So last time we talked a little geography, a little background. This time we're going to go way back thousands and thousands of years ago to when some of the earliest people arrived here in Pennsylvania, okay? So we're going to be on page 10 in your ebook. If you want to check that out and follow along with me, or if you just want to listen, that's okay too. Our vocab words over on the left today are migrate. Think about migrate. What do you hear, or what do you think of when that word comes to your mind? Okay. Hopefully you're probably thinking about animals. I'm thinking like we think about birds migrating south in the winter, or different sea creatures, sea mammals, things like whales or sharks have different migration periods. Another word we're going to look at here is adapt. Okay, we'll be talking about adapting. We're actually doing a lot of adapting right now as we're learning in different ways and doing things a little differently. For anybody watching this in the future, we're recording this during the coronavirus COVID-19 school closure. So that's what I'm referring to there. And then the last word we're going to look at is artifact. That's the word our vocab strategy gives us. It says an artifact is an object made by people, and scientists study these objects to learn facts about the way people lived. So putting that word fact in there, an art made by people. Something new that's added to our page today is a timeline. So right there we have a timeline, and it shows us the time period that this lesson is covering. This particular lesson covers a time period from about 12,000 years ago up until about 3,000 years ago. So we're talking about 9,000 years of history on 4 pages. So obviously we're not focusing on everything that happened during those 9,000 years. And we're covering a long period of time when you think about 9,000 years. So this happened, what we're reading about today, none of it happened quickly. We're talking about big chunks of time and long periods of time where things kind of stayed relatively the same, but there would have been small changes as well. Okay. Our build on what you know paragraph there at the top says you may have noticed that the way your neighborhood looks can change over time. And if you think about things, different stores opening and closing, new houses being built. So our communities change often, okay? And we see those changes over time. Well, geography also changes a great deal over time. The shape of the land, our landforms have changed and evolved over time. Okay? And just like last time, I'm going to have some other videos here that are going to go along with this. So I hope you're watching this one first, and then I'll be directing you to some of the video clips as well that I have posted here with this. So our main heading today is Pennsylvania in the Ice Age. Now I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Ice Age movies with, I forget their names, I haven't seen them in a long time, but with little Scrat, the little guy running around, the little rodent guy, and the woolly mammoth, and I don't know why I can't think of his name right now, the saber-toothed tiger. I can think of the guys who do the voices, but I can't think of the character names. I haven't watched those movies in several years, but that's kind of a fictionalized version of the Ice Age, but parts of that, it's historical fiction in a way. It's mostly fiction, but it is somewhat historical fiction because the Ice Age was a real event. In fact, there wasn't just one Ice Age. There have been many Ice Ages throughout history, periods where the temperatures on the Earth warm and cool. So we're looking at the most recent Ice Age, which occurred about 12,000 years ago. And that's what our main idea says here, is that scientists believe people first came to Pennsylvania thousands of years ago when the land was very different. Okay? So Pennsylvania didn't look like what we would know Pennsylvania as during that time. It would have looked much different. Okay? Thousands of years ago, Earth experienced a period called the Ice Age. During this time, Earth looked very different than it does today. Glaciers, or huge sheets of moving ice, covered parts of the Earth. Many scientists believe early people migrated from Asia or Europe to the Americas at that time. And I believe, Mr. Yakimak, in science, you went over some things with glaciers and the way they shaped the land as well. To migrate is to move from one place to another. Some scientists think that people in search of food crossed a land bridge that long ago connected Asia to North America. Others suggest that people traveled by sea. scientists continue to make discoveries about the first Americans. Now, there's two different ways of arriving in North America. It says that some scientists think they came by a land bridge, other scientists think they traveled by sea. I want to pause here and I want to show you exactly how that may have happened. All right, so here we are looking at Google Earth once again, and I want to show you how these two options may have worked. So here we are, here's the United States, Pennsylvania's over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of move this way, and you probably recognize this state. This is, of course, Alaska, okay? And then does anybody know what's over here? If you said Russia, that would be correct. So this is Russia, this is Alaska, and we think of Russia as being a really far away place. What we see here is it's actually not so far away at all. And if we look right here, those countries are actually fairly close to each other. So if you imagine 12,000 years ago during the last ice age, as a lot of the oceans froze, what happens to the water? Well, it turns into ice. And that means there's less water volume in the oceans because some of it has frozen into ice. And if there's less water in the ocean, you actually see there's a small island here, which tells me that this is not, as far as the ocean is concerned, an especially deep area. We've got this island sticking out here. So this area, the land would have been near enough to the surface that if some of that water froze, and in addition to that, if some of the water froze, this whole area could have turned to ice. So what scientists think happened is that when this water froze, it exposed a land bridge between Alaska and Russia. So one thing that scientists think could have happened is that as the mammoths were migrating, they could have followed, early people could have followed those mammoths from Asia or Europe into North America. Now, it would have been right from Asia there. Earlier, they may have been from Europe. So this is all Asia. But as we go over further to the east, or I'm sorry, to the west, we start to get toward Europe. And here's England and Spain. Germany and Poland would be in here somewhere. So over here would be parts of China. Korea would have been right here. Okay. And then this is the islands of Japan. So some scientists believe that those early people could have walked right from Asia and into Alaska. And then from there, they could have spread throughout Canada, North America, and eventually into South America. But the other theory we read about was that some scientists believe that those early people may have traveled by sea. So to look at how that may have happened, well, let's imagine that we're on the mainland of Asia and look at all these little islands. So let's say we came down from Korea. Now, the ships they would have had then, they wouldn't have had big ships. They wouldn't have had the big tall ships with sails like we think of as old ships. They would have had canoes, and they basically would have been hollowed out logs that they had dug into. So it would have been hard to travel all the way across the Pacific Ocean, but we could have hopped from here to here, and then maybe from here to here. And this could have happened over many, many years. Maybe it was an early group of people that moved from the mainland to this island, and then maybe their children decided to move further and explore these islands. And now we're in Japan. So as we could go through Japan here, they could have spent some time there. And then if they were needing more food, they may have continued to explore. Zoom out a little here. And they could follow these islands just from one island to the next with those small canoes. I believe that's back onto the mainland of Asia there. Look Look at all those little islands that are sticking out. And remember, if a lot of the water was frozen, some of these underwater mountain ranges, there would have been even more land exposed. So there would have been islands that are buried today that would have been exposed 12,000 years ago. So as we follow those, whoops, I'm zooming in when I don't want to be. But if we follow those islands, then eventually we end up back in Alaska. And there we are. So there are scientists that believe they traveled here by crossing the land bridge, which you're going to see if I zoom out a little bit. There's our land bridge from earlier, and there's those islands that we came across. So scientists have different theories on how those early people got here. Nobody's found conclusive evidence, positive proof yet that one way is right and the other is incorrect. So they believe that those are the two possible ways those early people came into North America. And then again, over centuries, over generations and generations, we eventually arrive here in Pennsylvania. So even though I said the earliest site of habitation in North America was found to be in Pennsylvania, obviously people had to be somewhere else first. They had to get here from somewhere. So it just means they haven't found proof of them living in those other places yet. They haven't found the artifacts. They haven't found the evidence. But most likely they were living in one of those places and then eventually migrated toward Pennsylvania, following the animals, following the food sources that they were hunting. So hope you enjoyed that little bit of insight. All right, so back to the book, and we're going to look at the climate warms at the top of page 11 if you're following along in the ebook, and we're talking about how the climate grew warmer. Many people agree that the first people arrived in present-day Pennsylvania at least 12,000 years ago. Now, a lot of people think history, oh, it's old stuff, it doesn't change, nothing changes, it's the same always. And that's not the case. When this book was written, it says scientists agree that the first people arrived in present-day Pennsylvania at least 12,000 years ago. There's some evidence that it was actually even longer ago than that. And there's actually a location in western Pennsylvania called Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, where they have found the earliest evidence of human habitation in North America, people living in North America. And it's right here in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to visit Meadowcroft Rock Shelter yet. They actually have displays and exhibits covering thousands of years of history. But they have found artifacts there. We'll talk about artifacts here in a bit, but they found artifacts there that show that people were living there up to maybe 16 to 17,000 years ago. So about 5,000 years longer than what your book is saying here. So history does change. Scientists are making new discoveries all the time and revising what we used to think or what people used to accept as true. For a long time, the land bridge theory was the only theory, and then scientists started looking, well, maybe they did travel by sea. Maybe they were able to travel by water. So it's hard to say for sure which of those is accurate. Okay, but back to the paragraph, and I'll restart since I got off topic there a little bit. Many scientists agree that the first people arrived in present-day Pennsylvania at least 12,000 years ago. Early people followed and hunted herds of animals such as mammoths. These animals no longer exist. The Ice Age ended when the climate warmed. This warming took place over thousands of years. So it wasn't just an overnight thing. It wasn't like, oh, next year it's going to be warmer. Okay? It was a long, gradual process, thousands of years for the temperatures to cool, and then thousands of years for them to rise again. Okay? So I'm going to have a video clip I'm going to post here for you too that talks about some of these Ice Age mammals. Everybody knows about dinosaurs and how cool dinosaurs are, but sometimes the Ice Age animals get overlooked, and there were lots of other cool creatures. It wasn't just the woolly mammoth that is fairly popular, but there was, and the saber-toothed tiger, but there were some really neat creatures that were living on Earth during the Ice Age that have all become extinct since. So it's definitely worth your time to do some Google searching, do some researching on Ice Age creatures, Ice Age mammals especially. Things like the giant sloth and the woolly rhinoceros and some of those different creatures that were around. As the climate changed, so did the land. Melted ice created new streams and rivers. This water helped shape Pennsylvania's landforms. It also covered the land bridge between Asia and North America. People could no longer use this land bridge to migrate. So over on the left side, there's also, under the vocab skill, there's a reading skill. And the reading skill in this lesson is cause and effect. You've probably talked about cause and effect in your language arts classes, but history is all about cause and effect. It's such an important skill in history because that's what history is. It's understanding how one thing led to another thing and how that thing may have led to two or three more things. So this chain of events, the way things unfold. So right here, when we talk about as the climate changed, so did the land, melted ice created new streams and rivers. Well, when the ice melted, new streams were created. When new streams were created, that caused new landforms to be created in Pennsylvania. That caused the land bridge that had once connected us to Asia to be covered up by water again. So as things changed, one thing leads to another, and that's cause and effect. And we're going to continue to see that in the next paragraph. New animals and plants appeared during this time, but some animals and plants died out. So again, more cause and effect. As the weather warmed, new animals and plants appeared. Old animals died out. Okay. Some scientists think the huge Ice Age mammals died out because early people hunted them too much. Others think the animals could not adapt to the warmer climate. Here's one of our vocab words. To adapt means to change in order to live in a new environment. And I said right now during our corona closures, we are having to adapt, do things differently. I'm videotaping lessons instead of having you there to talk with me and to be able to answer your questions in person, unfortunately. And that's one of the things I miss the most. But we can't have our discussions the way we normally did, so we're adapting. We're doing things differently. We're commenting in Google Classroom or doing things like that. So we're adapting. Early people adapted to the changes by hunting smaller animals and eating wild plants. So they made some changes. They had to learn to do things differently. And again, cause and effect. Because the woolly mammoths and other animals they hunted died out, what's the effect of that? Oh, they have to find new sources of food. They have to learn new ways of hunting to hunt different animals, to hunt smaller animals. Okay. We're going to talk about some of the different groups of people that lived in Pennsylvania at this time. And I think we're going to just look at one today. And I think we'll be probably through our whole lesson time for today. And then next time we'll look at some of the other groups. So today we're going to look at a group called the PaleoIndians. Paleo. Where have you heard paleo before? Maybe you're thinking of paleontologists, people who study ancient history, very long time ago. Those who study dinosaurs are called paleontologists. So we're talking about ancient times, long, long, long ago. The earliest people to live in North America were the Paleo-Indians. In fact, some people would call the Paleo-Indians by a more common or more familiar term, cavemen. Okay, and that's because of the fact that they used caves as shelter in some instances. Paleo-Indians moved from place to place, following herds of animals for food. They gathered nuts and berries to eat. Caves and tents served as shelters. Scientists learn about people who lived in the past by studying artifacts from the past. An artifact is an object made by human hands. Scientists have found Paleo-Indian artifacts in southwestern and central Pennsylvania. So we know they were here because scientists have found things that they could tell they made. And to an untrained eye, it may not look like anything. It may look like a rock. But to a scientist who knows what they're looking for and knows what they're studying, then they can understand, oh, this was made by this group of people. They have ways of figuring out how old something is using a process called radiocarbon dating, pretty advanced scientific process. So they can study these things and they can learn about these things and they can understand who made them, why they made them, what their purposes were. That's how we learn about these ancient people, especially in a time before we had written records, before people had written language that they could use to communicate. Okay, so I think we'll stop there with those 2 pages. That was a lot to explore and learn today. So we'll pause there for now. And then next time we'll take a look at some of the more recent groups. And by more recent, I'm not talking a lot more recent. Paleo-Indians were around about 12,000 years ago. We're going to look about 10,000 years ago, as well as a group that appeared here around 3,000 years ago. And it was just as time went forward and more technology advanced and more understanding came along, all those kinds of things developed. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. It was good to see you as always. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.